Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with your daily video update for May 5th, 2022. Today I'm going to concentrate on two matters. One is some economic news, and secondly, an update on a criticism of the U.S. policy for expanding the war against Russia. Let's start with the economy. It was a very dramatic day yesterday with the announcement that the Federal Reserve will be raising interest rates by 0.5%, supposedly to fight inflation. Now, this is the biggest hike since 2000. Jerome Powell, the Federal Reserve Chairman, in his announcement and in the subsequent commentary, and I looked at many of the different websites and speakers on this, commentators, and they all start with dangerous fallacies in the economic and financial thinking. The false choice between high or low interest rates, the issue is, where is the credit going to go? What is the ultimate economic policy? Is it to protect speculators, to protect a bubble system, or is it to rebuild a physical economy? Now, just on the talking heads say, well, the stock market and the bond markets rallied yesterday because investors were happy that the hike was 0.5% rather than 0.75%. Now, this supposedly calmed investors because the fear is that a larger hike would, quote, cool, unquote, the economy, leading to a chain reaction of defaults in the everything bubble. And that is a real fear. That's something that could happen. It's actually something that should happen, because the valuations sustained by the low interest rates are completely out of whack with the real value of the financial paper that they're written on. That is the derivative bubble, the mortgage-backed security bubble, credit card debt. It's unsustainable. So the explanation that higher rates will curb demand, consumer demand, and that will lead to a reduction in inflation, it's absurd. What it means is that people have to stop consuming or look for higher interest rate credit to continue to be able to consume. Now, how does that work? The inflation has already calmed consumer demand. To consume anything, personal and corporate debt will have to increase. And it's already, as I said, at unsustainable levels. People using credit cards, for example, to pay for medical bills or to pay for food and fuel, that's only adding to the debt that ultimately is going to crash. Now, secondly, the Fed announced they'll finally begin to unwind their balance sheet. They've purchased over $9 trillion worth of mortgage-backed securities, treasuries, and other instruments in order to pour liquidity in to prevent from defaults. Now, the excess liquidity is the cause of inflation, not increases in consumer demand. The excess liquidity on top of a collapsed physical economy means money is going to go to where you can get the quickest return, which is in speculation, not in goods production. Now, what this ignores is the difference between liquidity and solvency. The economy, the financial economy, is highly liquid. Banks are sitting on huge volumes of deposits. The Treasury, or the Federal Reserve, as I mentioned, has $9 trillion in financial assets that they're holding. The problem is that these are assets in corporations, in many cases, which are insolvent, which can't pay the interest on the debt, what are called zombie corporations. What good is it to pump money into them, meaning they're going to increase their debt to be able to keep the value, at the face value, on the books? So what we're looking at is the biggest fraud in financial thinking that goes back many, many centuries, but essentially in the recent period, to the British neoliberal monetary system that was implemented after the takedown of the Bretton Woods system in 1971. And this is what was defined in Lyndon LaRouche's triple curve. What LaRouche showed is that as you have a nonlinear increase in financial assets and then monetary assets to protect them. It comes from investment in the physical economy, which goes down. That is, real goods production collapses in order to afford pumping money into the system to protect the financial aggregates. This is what ultimately leads to a collapse. It's what causes inflation. It's what causes lack of goods, the breakdown of the supply chain. So to address that, it's not a question of a binary choice between high interest rates or low interest rates. It's a question of reorganizing the whole economy, recognizing that an economy is a physical goods production economy, which depends on investment in future technologies, which means scientific research and development, improving the quality of your labor force, which includes consumption and also education. These are the areas where we need the investment. And credit should come from a national credit institution, whether it's an infrastructure bank or a national bank, but not a Federal Reserve, which is essentially there to feed the interests of the private bankers and financial institutions. So those people who say, well, the question is interest rates, including President Trump, who's right in saying that raising the rates is going to have a negative effect on the economy, but simply keeping them low doesn't have a positive rate either. It just protects bankrupt institutions that have access to liquidity. So what's necessary is to move to an investment policy in physical goods production. Now, keep an eye on Russia on this. An economist named Sergei Glaziev, who has in the past been a supporter of LaRouche's ideas, is fighting against Nebulina, who's the central bank chairman in Russia, who thinks the same way Jerome Powell and the monetarists of the West do. When this is resolved in Russia, in Glaziev's favor, I'm sure, then Russia and China will be free to pursue a monetary policy based on backing the printing of money, of currency, for trade and investment on physical goods production. That is, the money will be backed by something real, as in the case of paying for gas in rubles, as opposed to the funny money schemes of the Western central banks. Now, let me move to a quick update on the war, because as Biden and the transatlantic allies are continuing to say we need more weapons, we have to fight to the death, we have to destroy Russia, ultimately the victory for Ukraine will be our victory. It's again the false dichotomy. The issue is not Ukraine. That's not the problem in dealing with Russia, but the collapse of the system. And the threat to the global bankers who control the military and strategic policy, the threat of an emergence of an alternative financial system based on real goods production as opposed to protecting the funny money. They're trying to destroy Russia to prevent an alternative to the idiocy we just saw from the discussion of the interest rate policy in the United States. So more sane voices are needed to point out that more war is not only no solution, but threatens to annihilate the human race. And I want to read you some quotes from Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, a retired military officer, a whistleblower from Afghanistan. He wrote an article in Responsible Statecraft, which attacks those who are pushing for more war, including Representative Adam Kinzinger, who's saying we should give Biden the ability, if necessary, to use whatever means are necessary, including U.S. troops or even nuclear weapons. Now, what retired Colonel Davis said is, quote, any war between Washington and Moscow stands a disturbingly high chance of going nuclear, an outcome that must be avoided at all costs. He went on to say, quote, the United States should not fight a war, any war, unless it is absolutely needed to prevent an actual or looming attack on our people or homeland. Period. War is not a tool to compel others to do our will. It is not an appropriate means of punishing an adversary for engaging in actions we don't like. In other words, he's attacking those who say the unipolar order has the right to demand adherence to the arbitrary rules that are for the good of those who are making the rules, but not necessarily for the common good of the countries that are being forced to submit to them. In other words, you don't use war to fight countries that are asserting their right to sovereignty. And he went on to say it would be the height of irresponsibility for American policymakers to take actions that make war with this nuclear superpower likely. He said, "I can assure you that no American would believe the cost was worth trying to help Ukraine if that cost would be nuclear war. Quote, it wouldn't even matter if we flattened Russian cities in response to an attack on us. Once the nuclear genie is let out, most of both countries could be turned into a nuclear wasteland." And he concludes with the following statement: "There's absolutely nothing related to Ukraine that could in any way justify the risk to American citizens and cities of a nuclear explosion resulting from a war between our two countries. It is time to stop any consideration at all of an intentional military action that could spawn a direct clash between Washington and Moscow. It bears repeating once more," he writes, "there is nothing at all at stake in the Ukraine-Russia war that justifies risking actions which could eventually result in the nuclear devastation of America." We need more sane voices like Colonel Daniel Davis. And I urge you to join with us in making sure that those people who think this way are heard, as opposed to the chattering imbeciles who comment on economic and strategic matters. That's why we need our motion for a new strategic and financial architecture to become the dominant issue in discussion in the United States and Europe. Tomorrow's Friday. If you have some questions for me, send them to me at harleysch@gmail.com, and I'll try to answer some questions if you send them. Don't forget, Saturday is the International Youth Call with Lyndon LaRouche. I'll have a link to that at the bottom of the description page.